Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Real Report. If anyone has a 1950s school desk to hide under in the event of a nuclear blast that they'd like to sell me, please let me know in the comments down below because we may need it. Now, we've got a lot of things to cover today, such as the Ukraine versus Russia war, the partial mobilization you've all heard about, the Institute for the Study of War, and the map we're going to look at. Also, winter's coming, some things on EU-NATO's reaction, China's reaction, Russia's new foreign recruitment, Russia's new nuclear policy, warning from the Serbian president, some things on Russian fertilizer and the German energy sector, which is an ominous warning for pretty much the rest of the world, and a little bit on the dollar index and Putin, talking about the Armenian Azerbaijan fighting. Without further ado, one last comment. The Real Report is not just an alternative news channel, it is a community. And thanks again to everyone here because this is the smallest, tightest knit it's ever going to be. So, regardless of the subscriber count, which welcome to about 60 new subscribers from the last video, I encourage everyone to participate, get active, and there's some great commentary and analysis from some guys on most of the posts already. So, welcome aboard. Happy to have you. If you guys have not checked this out already, I'll link it down below, the address by Putin. It's about 15 minutes long. Pretty interesting to read, just that you can put things in the right frame of mind and the perspective of where each side's coming from. And hopping into the Institute for the Study of War, again, understandingwar.org. Now, keep in mind, sometimes it's hit or miss, particularly today's, or I should say, 921's assessment was extraordinarily biased and kind of like picking through a trash heap, but here on September 20th, it was pretty good. So, Russian appointed occupation officials in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia Oblast announced on September 20th that they will hold a referendum on acceding to Russia, with a vote taking place from September 23rd to the 27th, and this is going to be important as we continue through the articles, so keep that in mind on the vote. Kremlin's annexation plans are primarily targeting a domestic audience. Putin likely hopes to improve Russian force generation capabilities by calling on the Russian people to volunteer for a war to defend newly claimed Russian territory. Also, if you guys haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe, really helps me out. Putin may believe that he can appeal to Russian ethno-nationalism in defense of purportedly Russian peoples, claimed Russian land to generate additional volunteer forces. Passage of a new law through the State Duma on September 20th, circumventing normal parliamentary procedures. This law codifies dramatically increased penalties for desertion, refusing conscription orders, and insubordination. The law notably does not order full-scale mobilization or broader conscription, or make any preparations for such activities. Now, they have said the Chechen leader, Kadyrov, called self-mobilization is the phrase they're going for. Trying to get volunteers. Now, Putin's annexation of occupied Ukrainian territory will broaden the domestic legal definition of Russian territory under Russian law, enabling the Russian military to legally and openly deploy conscripts already in the Russian military to fight in eastern and southern Ukraine. Now, Russia's semi-annual conscription cycle usually generates around 130,000 conscripts twice per year, so 260,000 total. The next cycle runs from October 1st, which is just around the corner, to December 31st. Russian law generally requires that conscripts receive at least 4 months of training prior to deployment overseas. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly denied that conscripts will be deployed to the Ukraine. Annexation could provide him a legal loophole, allowing for the over-deployment of conscripts to the fight. Russian-appointed occupation officials in Kherson, Zaporizhia Oblast announced the formation of volunteer units to fight with the Russian military against Ukraine. The Russian State Duma separately passed new incentives for foreign nationals to fight in Russia's military to obtain Russian citizenship, and will likely increase overseas recruitment accordingly, which we're going to talk about in another article as well. Now, the new law from September 20th allows foreign nationals to gain Russian citizenship by signing a contract and serving in the Russian military for 1 year. Notably, Russian law previously required 3 years of service to apply for citizenship. Russian forces in the Wagner private military company are also directly recruiting from Russian prisons. Russian President Putin likely intends to deter Ukraine's ongoing counteroffensives by annexing occupied Ukrainian territory and framing Ukrainian attempts to liberate occupied territory as attacks on Russia. Russian appointed occupation officials announced they will hold a referendum again, taking the vote 23rd to the 27th. The Kremlin's annexation plans are primarily targeting a domestic audience. Ukrainian forces continue disrupting ongoing Russian efforts to reestablish ground lines of communications across the Dnipro River in Kherson Oblast. Russian forces are likely targeting Ukrainian hydrotechnical infrastructure in Kharkiv and Luhansk Oblast to threaten Ukrainian positions along the Seversky Donets River. Russian forces conducted ground attacks in Donetsk Oblast on September 20th. Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed ground attacks. West, let's see, continue routine artillery strikes through Zaporizhia. Russian forces continue to degrade their force generation capabilities, apparently by cannibalizing training elements to fight in combat formations in Ukraine. If you guys haven't taken a look, quick note on this, the Ukrainian counteroffensive has retaken roughly 6,000 kilometers of territory back, and the total amount they would need to take back is roughly 20 times that. And the bigger question is if it's possible to hold that amount. A lot of the territory that they've pushed was simply 15,000 Ukrainians against about 2,000 Russian defenders in lowly defended areas. So also noteworthy here, we have had the first snow. Winter is coming in the Carpathian Mountains over here in western Ukraine by Slovakia, Romania, Moldova. Here's some other news.
Vladimir Putin has this morning been condemned for ordering Russia's first partial military mobilization since World War II. The threat of conscription causing chaos on the streets of Russia as we go to war. Hundreds of people rallying in Moscow and St. Petersburg, taking a stand against their president's war with Ukraine and the nuclear threat to the West. 9 correspondent Edward Goffrey is in London. Edward, good morning to you. Dramatic scenes in Russia.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin's remarks have prompted wild scenes right across Russia, with protesters against the war in Ukraine taking to the streets and clashing wildly, heavily and violently with police. Some of those officers covered from top to toe in armour, seen brandishing batons. Crowds have been heard chanting Putin to the trenches, risking their safety and their freedom. These scenes have been playing out across Moscow and even St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin's hometown. There are reports this evening that more than 800 people have been arrested. Civilian frustration spilled over after Putin gave a televised address, his first since the invasion of Ukraine began, where he ordered the conscription of some 300,000 reservists to boost his forces in Ukraine. In that address, he accused the West of nuclear blackmail and warned he has the weaponry to respond, and went on to say that he is not bluffing. It's the first mobilisation since World War II, and it's in response to recent success by Ukrainian forces who've regained Russian-occupied territory in recent weeks. It's also prompted an exodus of Russians trying to get out of the country quickly. There have been long queues at border checkpoints and flights have been selling out. Now, these remarks have been condemned by world leaders, most notably the US President Joe Biden, who addressed the UN General Assembly a little earlier.
This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are.
I'm going to pause it right there and save you guys all the loss of brain cells from our Alzheimer resident-in-chief and keep it moving here. Again, Russia called up 300,000 reservists, has 6,000 soldiers killed in Ukraine. Obviously, the number is more, but that works both ways. Ukrainian losses are certainly higher than what they're reporting as well. And of course, everyone around the world is denouncing or calling it reckless, whether it's NATO, specifically Scholz calls Putin announcement act of desperation. The UK is trying to spin this as Putin's showing he's failing at the invasion. What they should have said is that he's done fighting an equal war with 190,000 initially committed troops against the entire West, who is all fighting a proxy war. That would be a more accurate statement. But the real question, how does conscription or mobilization work in Russia? Highlighted a few things to run through. The early announcement of the 2022 spring draft, they said, is unlikely to increase Russian combat power in Ukraine in the near term. Well, obviously, if you're drafting new recruits, there's the logistics, the training, organization, all that good stuff. So, of course, new people who are being drafted or conscripted are not directly going to the front lines, but it opens up a lot of troops that already have combat experience or have already done their time to be re-enlisted. The Russian military is a hybrid format combining a traditional cadre and reserve conscript system and a contract professional system. Contract soldiers are concentrated in the cadre and elite units, especially the airborne units. Cadre and reserve units of the Russian armed forces are maintained at a low readiness with a limited number of professional staff and conscripts, with the expectation that they would be staffed with reservists in the event of mobilization. Although there are probably some uncommitted forces, Russian armed forces conscript men semi-annually, which we talked about already. Draft affects all men aged 18 to 27. Russian conscripts typically serve 1 year. Annual conscription pool of Russian military-aged men is currently 1.2 million people. The Russian General Staff reported conscripting 127,000 people in the spring out of 672,000 summoned men. Which I will note domestically in the United States, the Navy and the Army have not been able to reach their quotas for recruiting either. So before we all want to point fingers at every other country, we're also experiencing low recruitment numbers and a lot of people that can not only not score well at all in the ASVAB, they're also getting some absolutely atrocious fitness scores. Russian Reserve has over 2 million former conscripts and contract servicemen on paper. 2021, the Russian military started a new initiative to remedy its lack of ready reserves. The Russian Combat Army Reserve, they're calling it the BARS. Now, the BARS aim to establish an active reserve by recruiting volunteer reservists for 3-year contract service, operated on the same principle as U.S. and NATO reserves, where reservists actively train and are compensated. The concept of BARS 2021 was that volunteer Russian reservists would regularly participate in monthly exercises and maintain their mobilization readiness while maintaining their civilian jobs. That should sound familiar to everyone here. If I had to interject some commentary, I'd say the Russian reserves are different than our Ready Reserve or National Guard. The vast majority of them are like our inactive Ready Reserve, guys who serve their time and are now on a list to get recalled if there is a war. They don't train on weekends, etc. Russia has tried several iterations of our Ready Reserve with limited success. I suspect these are the guys that will go first. They should have the current training and some equipment. Then they would be followed by the others over time as they come in for retraining and equipment. If I was Russia, I'd start with the guys obviously most recently released from active duty and then work backwards if I had to take a guess. And of course, China reacts to Putin's speech, urges immediate ceasefire and dialogue as they continue to play both sides of the coin, but primarily in Russia's favor behind the scenes. And Biden rebukes Russia's outrageous Ukrainian escalation, says the U.S. is not seeking a new Cold War in a bumbling, babbling, nonsensical speech. Putin's outrageous invasion of Ukraine and latest escalation by ordering a partial mobilization. The world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened, but no one threatened Russia, and no one other than Russia sought conflict, which, of course, is Western propaganda at its finest. I could comment more on that, but I don't need to get striked on YouTube for misinformation. We're not seeking a new Cold War. Biden made mention of alleged atrocities by Russian forces in places like Izium and even charged the Kremlin with torture of Ukrainian civilians. Again, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reporting. Calling the moves urgent, necessary steps to defend the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Russia, Putin said that Russia is fighting the full might of NATO, the U.S., and its allies. He said are seeking to destroy Russia. Now, he is right about the fighting the full might of NATO and the West, as we continue to pump everything we have available into Ukraine. Russia will definitely use all means at its disposal to defend Russian territory. He says this is not a bluff. He's definitely overplayed that line. He has 100% overplayed that line. I can see where it's, I'm warning you, I'm warning you, I'm warning you, and then you don't get another warning, bang. But usually if you have to say, something that many times, you see where I'm going. The king shouldn't have to declare that he's the king. U.S. officials were quick to condemn what they said is a severe escalation of the war of aggression. The White House issued an initial statement saying it takes Putin's words about nuclear weapons seriously, but that it still doesn't see the need to increase America's nuclear readiness and strategic deterrence. He also expects to announce $2.9 billion for a fund aimed at mitigating global food insecurity, in part driven by the 7-month Ukraine conflict, and that's from Biden, which ties into some stuff on fertilizer and food shortages, which I've made several videos on. So if you guys haven't checked those out, I would strongly recommend it. Interesting note, Russian airlines ordered to stop selling tickets to Russian men aged 18 to 65, supposedly. According to journalists, Russian airlines have stopped selling tickets to Russian men unless they can provide evidence of approval to travel from the Ministry of Defense. The partial mobilization of the country's 25 million reservists, which is interesting, I highlighted because that's a different number than what all the other articles have said. By noon Moscow time, direct flights from Moscow to Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan had also stopped showing up on the website. Now, Russia opens military recruitment center for foreigners in case you want to join the other side. The Ukrainian side has touted its own Foreign Legion, which we're all familiar with, calling it the International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine. Potential recruits can even go to an official website and click join. Ukraine announced that more than 20,000 foreign volunteers from over 52 different countries had arrived. As the study noted further, many of the new arrivals were well trained with prior military experience. These included veterans who served in the U.S. Army, U.S. Marine Corps, and British Army. Some pundits have said these mercenaries have remained deeply involved in the ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive, which began in earnest this month. Obviously regaining control, especially in Kharkiv in the east, and about 6,000 kilometers that they've pushed back. Again, the big question, I don't think they're going to be able to hold that if Russia deploys double the amount of troops to the region. The Russian government has opened a military recruitment center focused on foreign citizens, the mayor of Moscow announced in a new initiative. Again, we covered that briefly at the start of the video. And of course, Russian nukes can be used to defend annexed Ukraine regions, the Kremlin warns. Territorial integrity of our country, he said, is threatened. We will certainly use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. Again, saying it's not a bluff. Russian seized territory and the move to vote in several areas, including the LPR, DPR, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia regions. There is no going back, and that even a nuclear option could be on the table. Noteworthy, Russia has announced that not only partial mobilization capabilities, but also any Russian weapons, including strategic nuclear weapons and weapons based on new principles, could be used for such protection. When these territories join Russian, then they are inside Russia. They are Russian oblasts. Attempts to defend, formerly Ukraine territory, would then mark an invasion of Russian territory supported, here's the big takeaway, by NATO equipment. Also, Medvedev's warning of willingness to use nukes covers those territories inside Ukraine if they vote to join Russia. So that's the big takeaway. And of course, Serbian president warns of great world conflict within 2 months, the worst situation since World War II. Interesting takeaway, as there's a lot of eyes in the U.S. If anybody knows specifics, please comment down below about September 24th. Specifically out in Colorado in the U.S. Maybe some kind of false flag thing going on. I don't know. Just keep your ears to the ground. And a lot of countries are talking about this is already the start of World War III, which I've covered in numerous videos already with the articles, of course, in the background. You see a crisis in every part of the world, the Serbian state broadcaster said. All right, Putin accuses the EU of blocking Russian fertilizer from reaching poorest countries. The UN has already said there's going to be severe food insecurity across the globe. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday accused the European Union of blocking 300,000 tons of Russian fertilizer from reaching the world's poorest countries to transfer for free. He even wanted to do supposedly. It's clear they do not want to let our companies make money. He said, but we would like to donate the fertilizer in question to countries that need it. Ukraine, one of the world's largest grain exporters, was forced to halt almost all deliveries after Russia started its military operation. In July, an agreement with Russia and Ukraine was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations, designating 3 ports for Kiev to send grain supplies through a Russian blockade. Similar agreements signed at the time allowed Russia to export its agricultural products and fertilizer despite Western sanctions. Russia is one of the world's major producers of fertilizer. This is going to have some very big consequences for 2023. And getting on into Germany and final discussions over Uniper nationalization. I covered this 2 videos ago as well. German gas company Uniper said Tuesday it was on the brink of being nationalized as Berlin stepped in to prop up the energy sector amid a crisis triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. First simulation of a blackout in a German district, 400 dead in 96 hours. This is no joke. I made a lot of videos on the energy crisis, and as we get into winter, a lot of those things are unfortunately going to come to fruition. I covered an article that stated that Germany was working on making, quote, warming islands, say in public shelters, schools, etc., so that people could go there to get warm. When the power shuts off, now they're running simulations for just that. German Association of Towns and Municipalities is now warning of disaster and warning of possible overloading of German electricity grid. Cities and municipalities are not even remotely prepared for such a scenario. The blackout, unfortunately, is no longer a horror story of sinister conspiracy theorists, but because the authorities now consider the danger to be real, which they've been prepping in the background for months, thanks to the hasty sanctions imposed on Russia by European politicians and the hasty introduction of green energy policies. People in Europe will face abnormal energy costs, again up about 1,000%, and be at constant risk of power outages, especially in the coming winter months. Municipalities in Germany are preparing for a dark winter with blackouts. The crisis will cost some providers dearly as they can no longer cope with the burden of rising energy costs, general inflation, and a pervasive shortage of skilled workers. A large-scale, unprecedented disaster is threatening. In the first 24 hours of a blackout, Germany substations would fail, water tanks would run dry, causing a whole new set of problems. Looting and fires would ensue, would add hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, and in just 2 days, most cell phones would stop working. District Fire Inspector Christian Russell warns Germans to stock up on food and drinking water for 14 days, and I will tell you guys, you should about 100x that. The European Commission is now taking action by asking all European governments to reduce electricity consumption by 10%, mandatory reduction of 5% during peak consumption period, and businesses in Germany are now paying electricity prices 1,000% higher than normal, and many businesses are currently going bankrupt due to high energy costs, which the video I did about the lights going out in Paris and them cutting power to the Eiffel Tower to meet those energy requirements. It's happening, people. Putin urges restraint after Armenia Azerbaijan fighting. Of course, this has been going on since 2020 with 200 more dead in the flare-up last week. That 6-week war ended with more than 6,500 deaths and a Russian peace deal. So a little bit of history there. And the last article here before we wrap it up, dollar index highest in 20 years on Ukraine, and the Fed rate raised another 75 basis points yesterday. So keep an eye as inflation rages, and I hope you guys understand how that works. I'll probably do an economic video later today or in the next couple days, but you have to raise interest rates higher than inflation to get inflation under control. Inflation's at 8.3%, and that's a lie. It's realistically, for the everyday person's wallet, about 3 times that. You have to raise interest rates like in the 80s with Volcker higher than inflation to get it under control, which the Fed doesn't seem willing to do because it would absolutely collapse the economy. So keep preparing, keep stocking up, do what you can with what you got where you are, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you guys find anything interesting, again, please leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. Have a good day.